A team of paleontologists kneels in a dry riverbed in northern China, brushing dust from a curve of stone that turns out to be bone, not rock. The place is called Huanglong, Yellow Dragon Valley, and it has carried that name for centuries, long before anyone here knew the word dinosaur. For generations, farmers in this region pulled fossils like these from the ground, ground them into powder for medicine, and told their children they were digging up the remains of dragons. They weren't wrong to be amazed. They were only wrong about what exactly they'd found. That single detail unravels something bigger than one valley in China. Because if the people who lived here built their dragon myth around real bones pulled from real earth, what does that mean for every other culture on the planet that told nearly the same story? Egyptians, Norse seafarers, Aboriginal Australians, medieval Europeans separated by oceans, deserts, and thousands of years of history, with no way of ever comparing notes, and somehow they all arrived at a version of the same beast, a massive, scaled, serpent-bodied creature tied to storms, fire, floods, and guarded treasure. The word itself points backward toward an answer. Dragon descends from the Greek drakon, meaning serpent, which in turn traces to an older root meaning to gleam or to stare. Some scholars think it described the unblinking, almost hypnotic look of a snake's eye. Strip away the wings and the claws that later folklore bolted on, and what's left in nearly every early telling is the same simple shape: a giant snake. No legs, no fibrous from a fantasy film, just an enormous serpent, sometimes wearing the face of another animal, sometimes something closer to human. So why a serpent, and why does it show up on every continent independent of the last? Part of the answer sits inside your own skull. In 1977, Carl Sagan proposed in The Dragons of Eden that the fear of reptiles might be older than memory itself, not something learned in one lifetime, but something carried forward from a distant evolutionary past. Carl Jung had already been circling a similar idea decades earlier, with his notion of a collective unconscious inherited patterns of fear and instinct shared across an entire species. It sounds like speculation until you look at what modern biology actually found. Long before primates existed, snakes were already among the deadliest threats mammals faced. When the age of dinosaurs ended, mammals spread rapidly across a planet that still belonged in part to constrictors capable of overpowering them. Early primates responded not by growing faster legs, but by evolving sharper eyes, color vision, depth perception, the ability to pick a camouflaged shape out of tangled branches before it struck. Researchers have since shown that humans detect the outline of a snake faster than almost any other image, often before we're even consciously aware we've seen it, and that our minds instinctively inflate how large and how close a snake appears the moment we spot one. Fear, in other words, isn't just remembered, it's built in. That explains why a serpent was always going to be humanity's chosen nightmare. It doesn't yet explain why the dragon grew treasure, storms, floods, and buried lairs. Details fear alone couldn't invent. For that, the trail leads underground, into a field called Geomythology, the study of how landscapes themselves seem to have shaped the legends told about them. Return to Greece, to the myth of Cadmus, who was said to have slain a monstrous water serpent and planted its teeth in the soil like seed. Across the Greek mainland and on the island of Chios, ancient people were in fact unearthing enormous fossilized teeth, not from any serpent, but from mastodons, prehistoric relatives of the elephant. To someone who had never seen an elephant, let alone its ancestor, a jaw full of those teeth would have looked exactly like proof that a monster had once lived and fallen there. In northern China, a different fossil shaped a different feature: the branching antlers of an extinct Pliocene deer, found buried in the same regions where the earliest dragon carvings appear. Carvings that give the Chinese dragon its distinctive crown of antlers, a trait no serpent has ever grown on its own. Farther west, in the Sivalik hills of what is now Pakistan, local legends spoke of dragons crowned with jeweled crests. Dig into that same ground and you find the skulls of Civatherium, an extinct giraffe relative, their bone often studded with glinting calcite crystals, a jeweled crest, quite literally, waiting in the dirt. Fire told its own version of the story. In southern Turkey, natural gas still seeps from cracks in the earth and ignites on contact with air, flames rising straight out of solid rock even today. The Greeks placed the chimera, a fire-breathing hybrid, in that exact region. Not far away, the scorched, blackened landscape left behind by ancient volcanic activity was said to be the battlefield where Zeus struck down the 100-headed dragon Typhon. the land itself standing as evidence that the fight had truly happened. Even Pele, the volcano goddess of Hawaii, once seemed purely legendary, until geologists studying her story used it to correct their own timeline for when Kilauea first collapsed. In Australia, an errant legend about a star falling into a waterhole led researchers directly to a previously undocumented meteor impact site. Again and again, when scientists finally took these stories at their word, instead of dismissing them as pure invention, the ground gave up something real. Put it together, and the dragon stops looking like a simple invention and starts looking like a collaboration between a brain already primed by millions of years of evolution to fear the shape of a serpent and a world scattered with bones, craters, and fire that seemed to confirm every fear was justified. Different regions produce different evidence, so different cultures produce different dragons, antlered in China, jeweled in Pakistan, fire-breathing above the gas vents of Turkey. But underneath all of them sits the same ancient universal shape and the same ancient universal instinct. Maybe that's the real reason this story has outlived nearly every other one humanity has ever told. Long before science had a name, before anyone understood fossils or volcanoes or the mind's own wiring, our ancestors were already doing something remarkably close to it, looking at the evidence in front of them and building a story sturdy enough to explain it. We're still doing exactly that today, just with better tools. If this kind of hunt for the truth behind the myth speaks to you, stay a while longer, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which legend you think is hiding real history underneath it, because the Earth, it turns out, has been keeping records a lot longer than we have.